May 1st, 2018. Doug Ford looked into a camera and made a promise.
The people, I've heard it loud and clear, people don't want me touching the Greenbelt. We won't touch the Greenbelt.
It was unambiguous, it was public, and for 4 years, Ontarians believed him. Then, Ford won re-election in June 2022, and on the evening of September 14th, a senior official from his government sat down to dinner with two of Ontario's most prominent housing developers. The developers handed him envelopes. Inside, a list of protected Greenbelt land they wanted open for development. The next morning, one of those developers spent $80 million on land they could not legally build on. Weeks later, the government quietly removed that piece of land and many others from protection. Across the removed parcels, the developers stood to make an estimated $8.3 billion. A public promise, a private dinner, and a government that has spent 3 years trying to make sure you never find out the truth. And in this video, we'll cover what happened between the promise and the cover-up. Ontario's Greenbelt was created in 2005 under the Liberal government of Dalton McGuinty. It emerged from a specific crisis. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the Greater Toronto Area was sprawling outward at a pace that alarmed planners and municipal governments alike. The Greenbelt was the answer, a permanent legislative line drawn in the soil. 2 million acres, larger than Prince Edward Island. It provides clean drinking water to 7 million Ontarians. Farmland make up 40% of its total area. What remains inside the Greenbelt is some of the most productive agricultural soil in Canada. Around the world, it was held up as a model, proof that a fast-growing region could protect what it had. And that promise to protect it meant something specific. The Greenbelt wasn't a policy position Ford could reverse with a press release. Any changes to its boundaries required a formal, legislated public process. Ford's public promise in May 2018 was not his first word on the Greenbelt. It was his second. Months earlier, in February 2018, while running for the leadership of Ontario's Progressive Conservative Party, a video leaked of him telling a private audience his plans for the Greenbelt.
We will open up the Greenbelt, not all of it. We're going to open a big chunk of it up, and we're going to start building.
The backlash was immediate. Within days, Ford reversed. The promise we heard earlier, we won't touch the Greenbelt, was the retreat, not the original position. Ford won the PC leadership in March 2018. 3 months later, the Progressive Conservatives won the Ontario provincial election and Ford became premier. For the next 4 years, the official position was a firm no, but the line was never as firm as it looked. Ford's deputy chief of staff, Andrew Sidnell, later described the Greenbelt as a lever to pull. The public position was no, the internal position was not yet. Then, Ford won re-election in June 2022. Shortly after, he sent a mandate letter to Housing Minister Steve Clark. The instruction was specific. In fall 2022, complete work to codify processes for swaps, expansions, contractions, and policy updates for the Greenbelt. The task of turning that mandate letter into action was handed to Ryan Amato, Clark's chief of staff, appointed to the role in July 2022. In September, Amato sought a meeting directly with Premier Ford to ask for clarity. Were the Greenbelt swaps something that actually needed to happen, or might they quietly disappear? He left the meeting with his answer. That same day, he sent a text message to a colleague. 3 words. They are serious. The night before the text was sent, Amato had been at a dinner. The event was the annual Chairs Dinner of BUILD, the Building, Industry and Land Development Association, Ontario's main developer lobby group. Amato was seated at the same table as 2 of Ontario's most prominent housing developers and a registered lobbyist. The developers used the dinner to push for specific parcels of their land to be removed from the Greenbelt. Amato, now clear that Ford was serious, proved receptive. The morning after the BUILD dinner, one of the developers at that table spent $80 million on 283 hectares of Greenbelt land in King Township. The public had no idea the Greenbelt was even under review. What followed was policy violation. A team of 6 political staff, not trained planners or environmental scientists, was given 3 weeks to assess which lands would be removed. When ministry staff told Amato they could not assess infrastructure availability for proposed sites in that time frame without contacting municipalities, the parameters were simply changed. Now, they only needed to confirm whether land was adjacent to a developed urban area. To avoid suspicion, the Greenbelt project team was barred from consulting partner ministries, municipalities, or conservation authorities about environmental risks while drafting the proposed changes. No sites were eliminated from consideration based on environmental or agricultural concerns. The majority of proposed sites would not have met the original thresholds. On November 4th, 2022, with no press conference and no fanfare, the government posted an online notice. 7,400 acres of Greenbelt land across 15 parcels would be removed from protection to allow for housing development. The same day the announcement was posted, a 30-day public consultation window opened on Ontario's Environmental Registry. The government received over 29,000 submissions with what its own summary described as a broad opposition to the removals. An official response was published on December 21, 2022. It stated in plain language, no changes were made to the proposal as a result of public consultation. Across all 15 removed parcels, the developers who had lobbied Amato at that September dinner stood to see their collective land values rise by an estimate $8.3 billion, a figure based on 2016 valuations. The actual number, accounting for price increases between 2016 and 2022, was almost certainly higher. The Ford government justification was based on a fact. Ontario is in a housing crisis. Therefore, to them, the Greenbelt had to be open to build enough homes. But this didn't hold up. Before the Greenbelt decision, the province had commissioned an independent Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force to study the crisis. Its report came out in February 2022, months before the Greenbelt announcement. The finding was direct. A shortage of land is not the cause of the province's housing challenges. The real problem was zoning. 70% of land zoned for housing in Toronto and 50% across the province was restricted to single detached or semi-detached homes, the lowest density that exists. The solution was not more land. It was allowing more housing types on land that already existed. Environmental Defense found that the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area already had roughly 59,000 hectares of land designated for development, nearly 4 times what Ontario would need to accommodate projected population growth through 2051. The Alliance for a Livable Ontario found enough land already in planning pipelines to build more than 2 million homes, twice the provincial target. The Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario stated explicitly that Greenbelt removal was not a necessary step to address Ontario's housing needs. The Ford government promised 50,000 homes on the removed land. Greenbelt land had no water, no sewers, no transit. Building that infrastructure takes years and costs billions. Homes on that land would be among the most expensive in the region. The housing crisis is real, but the Greenbelt had nothing to do with solving it. The Ford government was using it just as a cover-up. Journalists at the Narwhal and the Toronto Star began pulling land registry records after the November announcement. What they found was difficult to explain as a coincidence. Their investigation showed that developers had purchased Greenbelt land before the public announcement, and that at least 6 developers had acquired parcels after Ford came to power, in what looked like a pattern of anticipatory acquisition. Freedom of information requests were surfacing internal documents. Opposition parties were demanding answers. What nobody yet had was proof of how the selections had been made inside the government, who had proposed which parcels, and why. 10 months later, on August 9, 2023, Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk released her special report on changes to the Greenbelt. It answered the questions. Approximately 92% of the land ultimately removed from the Greenbelt had been proposed by developers who attended that September dinner, submitted directly to Amato, who was running the selection process. The first 2 sites had arrived in a package provided to the Chief of Staff at the dinner itself. 3 others requested shortly after. The Agriculture Ministry found that 76% of the removed land was in active agricultural use at the time of removal. About 83% was classified as Class 1 to 3 prime agricultural land, the highest quality farmland in the province. The Auditor General also found that political staff had conducted significant portions of the process using personal email accounts and personal devices rather than government channels. Integrity Commissioner John David Wake investigated in parallel. He found that Clark had left an untrained and unsupervised Amato to run a chaotic and almost reckless process that created an opportunity to further the private interests of some developers improperly. Clark had apparently never asked Amato how the properties were selected. He simply took the proposal to cabinet. Lissig has since said she believes Premier Ford is ultimately responsible. The mandate letter, signed by Ford directing Clark to codify processes for the Greenbelt changes, is the most direct documentary link to the Premier's office. What followed was pure damage control. 2 ministers gone in 3 weeks. Steve Clark resigned as housing minister on September 4th. His letter cited only a desire to not be a distraction. 16 days later, a second minister resigned over his relationship with a developer whose land has been removed from the Greenbelt. Ford stood at a microphone in Niagara Falls on September 21st.
I made a promise to you that I wouldn't touch the Greenbelt. I broke that promise. And for that, I am very, very sorry. As a first step to earn back your trust, I'll be reversing the changes we made and won't make any changes to the Greenbelt in the future.
In December 2023, a new legislation passed requiring any further changes to be approved by the full Ontario Legislative Assembly. The RCMP opened a formal criminal investigation in October 2023 into whether Ford's changes had corruptly favored certain developers. Due to the gaps in the record, involved staff was ordered to produce Greenbelt-related emails from their personal accounts. In January 2025, Ford called a snap election. He campaigned almost entirely on the threat of US tariffs under Donald Trump. The Greenbelt scandal was barely mentioned. A month later, on February 27, 2025, Ford won a third consecutive majority, becoming the first Ontario Premier to win 3 straight majorities since 1959. In April 2026, the Ford government passed Bill 97, tucked inside an omnibus budget bill. It rewrites Ontario's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act to permanently exempt the Premier, cabinet ministers, and their offices from FOI requests. And the changes apply retroactively, reaching back across 40 years of records, meaning any FOI already filed, any appeal already underway, and any court case already in progress is subject to the new restrictions. The Greenbelt-related email case is expected to collapse entirely as a result. So is the separate court battle seeking Ford's personal phone records from the days before the 2022 Greenbelt announcement. Neither set of records is likely to ever be made public. The Greenbelt Act requires a full review of the protected zone every decade. The last review happened in 2015. The next was supposed to be conducted in 2025, but it wasn't. The council responsible currently has no members. 7 of them resigned in 2020 in protest over changes the Ford government made to conservation authorities. No replacements have been appointed. In December 2025, Municipal Affairs Minister Rob Flack broke months of silence on the file, saying the government still intended to conduct the review, but provided no date, no timeline, and no details on who would conduct it. When asked again on March 31st, 2026 if there were any updates, Flack's response was a brief, "No thanks." As of the publication of this video in June 2026, the review has not started. The government has said nothing further. Ontario built the Greenbelt because some things are too important to leave to any single government. But the structure behind it is being purposely weakened. Weakened by the same government trying to dismantle what it promised to care for. Fortunately, through serious investigative work, this story is being untangled. But the laws that made it possible to find out what happened are being rewritten by the same government they exposed. And the man in charge is still in office. If you like this type of content and would like to learn more about the environment that surrounds us, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. Stay tuned for more!